The Nintendo Wii probably doesn't need any introduction, as it is one of the most popular video game consoles of all time. And that is obviously in no small part to the motion controls. The unique Wiimote actually allowed for very unique controls in a lot of video games that up to this point we haven't really seen yet. It gave a unique spin on a lot of common genres where swinging the remote or shaking it was actually now the norm. And obviously this also includes racing games. In fact, this year, Mario Kart Wii is one of the most successful Mario Kart games of all time, and also one of the most sold Nintendo Wii games of all time. Obviously this was in no small part to Mario Kart Wii being bundled in with the console, but to this day it still remains the de facto racing game of the Nintendo Wii. But obviously that begs the question, what other racing games were out there? After all, the Wiimote actually had an entirely separate accessory, which actually turns the Wiimote into basically a racing game wheel. And this one was actually super useful in Mario Kart Wii, as you actually used to tilt the Wiimote in order to steer, kind of like you were actually grabbing onto a steering wheel, which the wheel accessory made a lot more intuitive. But surely this accessory wasn't just made for Mario Kart Wii. Surely there are other racing games out there for the Wii that this accessory can be used for. But if you were to ask most people what other racing games there were other than Mario Kart Wii, most people I don't think could come up with much. And if you look at the Wii's most sold games, other than Mario Kart Wii, you're not really gonna see any other racing games. And so I decided to check out 15 racing games all throughout the years for the Nintendo Wii, to see if the Wii had a racing game library that was actually worth playing. All of the games you're gonna see me talk about in this video are ordered in release order, and maybe we'll see some kind of evolution to these over time. So without further ado, let's dive into the wacky world of Wii racing games. Kicking off the list, we already have quite a... I thought we were doing racing games. You know what? Let me just update the Wikipedia page of this game real quick. You wouldn't necessarily expect the Wii to have a Gran Turismo clone as a launch title, but here it is. GT Pro Series was the very first racing game for the Nintendo Wii, along with another game we'll get to, and is a direct follow-up to the GT Advance series for the Game Boy Advance. In fact, one of these games I did already check out in a separate video, and this here is essentially its successor, the first entry in the series entirely in 3D. And it would also be the last entry, as the developer made no more racing games after it and eventually stopped making games entirely after 2014. But at least they made Dogs 2. Which is hardly surprising, as this game got absolutely slammed by critics on launch. I mean, IGN gave this game a 4 out of 10. Which is still one of the more favorable reviews, and that's saying something. But was this game actually that bad? I mean, for my part, I actually really enjoyed the predecessor on the GBA, and after playing GT Pro Series, I can say with confidence that the critics at the time had no idea what they were talking about. Now admittedly, I am fairly biased, since I love the tried and true Gran Turismo formula, which this game is loosely adapting in a more casual format. Still, there's actually a lot about this game to appreciate. But it's certainly not the graphics. Since we're coming straight off the GameCube, I didn't necessarily expect to be blown away by the visuals. But my god, this game is kind of ugly. Now granted, some stages can look pretty decent. In fact, I like the kind of cel-shaded cartoon look the game is going for, particularly with the shadows on the car. But the tracks just look so basic. It just feels like the budget ran out for the environment designers, so they just scribbled something together in Microsoft Paint. I mean, here's my attempt. Doesn't look too different, I think. But we're obviously not here looking for solid graphics, we're here for fun. If the game is not fun, why bother? And this is where GT Pro Series actually shines. In the main career mode, you first start off in a Honda Fit. Actually, wasn't there another Gran Turismo type game that put you in a Fit in the beginning? I don't know, but they definitely ripped it off from this game. From the garage you can then choose between various themed championships, which are actually very interesting. The Crapman Trophy? For most of these, each event has entry restrictions and you need to use a corresponding car to enter, which can make for some pretty wacky event setups. And on that note, I think the developers hate me. The races themselves are pretty straightforward though. You're starting in the back of the grid and need to climb your way to the top. It's all circuit races, but the track variety makes up for the repetition, I think. And even then, you tend to progress pretty quickly through the career mode, so you will probably have beaten the game before it gets boring. Handling wise, it's pretty much as arcade as it gets. And in fact, I think pretty much all of these games we're looking at today will be arcade in nature. Which honestly makes way more sense, as the Wii in many people's eyes was this family-friendly console that anyone can pick up and play with. Or do you want to have old grandma play iRacing on the Wii? With motion controls? Don't think so. Speaking of which, since this was the first time I tried to play a racing game with motion controls in over a decade, it took some time to get used to. Like in many Wii racing titles, you need to tilt the Wii mode to steer the car. Basically act like it's a remote-controlled steering wheel. The game does offer an additional control setup where you need to pull the Wiimote up and down in order to change gears. However, this only worked about 70% of the time. So for example, often I would pull the Wiimote down in order to shift down a gear, which the game would not recognize. But what the game would recognize is the motion of me pulling it up again to put it in its default position, and so the car would shift up instead. Really, you need to borderline whack yourself with the Wiimote in order for the game to correctly recognize what you want the car to do. So for the most part, I stuck to automatic transmission, but kept the motion controls for steering on, as it would actually allow me to take smooth lines through corners. In fact, this actually became really satisfying to master, as I started to drift through corners with way more speed. So yeah, driving in GT Pro Series is definitely a lot of fun and a decent introduction to how motion controls could work in a Wii racing game. You have to remember that this game was a launch title for the Wii, so the developers were pretty much pioneering how this sort of stuff should work. And I think that deserves some kudos. With every event that you finish, you unlock a new upgrade part and a car to pick up at the car dealer. What the f*** is that? Please use it well. Sure. Now, unlike in Gran Turismo, cars here are actually free. There's no currency system or anything of that sort. You simply unlock the other half of the car list as you play through the game. Which is still a great motivator, as the car list is actually pretty awesome. You got everything ranging from budget K cars to sports cars and even minivans. It is a shame that all car brands in this game are Japanese, but for what it is a really nice deep cut of Japanese car culture. Just don't look too closely at the car model quality. If you found something you want to drive, you can fit on the various upgrade parts you've unlocked throughout the career. Some of these even change how the car looks. Or how it sounds. Ah! Out of all the things in this game, why is the volume of a car horn the one thing they decided to make realistic? And I don't know, there's something else about this upgrade menu that's kind of cool. When you select different parts in the menu, the camera does these cool shots showing off where the part will be installed. And I swear, this could make any car look cool. You can also fit drift tires on the car. If you hate yourself. Yeah, maybe it's because I'm still not entirely used to motion controls, but the car has become incredibly hard to control with drift tires equipped. There's actually an entirely separate game mode where you need to chain drifts together to make a combo, and I figured, hey, maybe that would be a good place to practice. I got 2. But yeah, all in all, this is genuinely a fun time, especially for enthusiasts of Japanese cars. For what it is, which is a simplified arcadey variant of Gran Turismo, there's a lot of fun to be had here. Look, they even adapted the license tests no one liked. I suppose for me personally, as someone who has played the predecessor on the GBA before, it's kind of missing something. In essence, it's the exact same game as on the Game Boy Advance. There's nothing really new in the way of content. It's the same game as before, but in 3D and with slightly better handling. And I don't know, the GBA game had a certain charm to it with its pixel graphics and 16-bit music that the Wii game is kind of lacking. The Wii game does have decent music too. Unfortunately, the tinnitus I got from the engine sounds prevented me from actually listening to it. I suppose overall, GT Advance 3 was really impressive for a GBA game, whereas GT Pro Series is just decent for a Wii game. Doesn't mean it's bad, I just expected a little more. 4 out of 5 stars though. So, does anyone remember MotorStorm? You know, that insanely over-the-top off-roading series on the PlayStation 3? What if I told you that the following game will make even that one look like taking a driver's license test? Excite Truck is basically if someone injected MotorStorm with the most potent crack cocaine known to man. And that's before MotorStorm was even a thing. I mean, some of my reactions here probably say it all. Let's go! Out of all the games in this list, I wouldn't be surprised if this one is the most insane one out of them all. There's so much going on at any given point, it's hard for me to even begin to describe what's happening. But let me try. So in Excite Truck, it's not about being the fastest, it's about being the most deranged. In races, every action that you make, such as drifts, jumps, narrowly avoiding trees, all of that gives you stars, which is essentially your score. And your score is what determines whether you beat the race and can move on to the next one. You do get bonus points for finishing higher in the standings, but you can also drive like a total jackass and still get a pass from the game, even if you came in last. Once again, you steer the car by tilting the Wii mode. However, things are a little more simplified this time. This game essentially runs on 2 buttons, your throttle and your boost. There is a brake as well, but I must have used it about 2.5 times throughout my entire playthrough. Your boost works the same way it does in MotorStorm. The longer you hold it down, the more your engine starts to heat up, and you want to prevent holding it on for too long because your engine will overheat and slow you down otherwise. But if your route navigation is good enough, you can extend your boosts via jumps or driving through water, which cools down your engine. Damn, they really did copy a lot from this game. In fact, although this game looks fairly brainless at first glance, it actually has a surprisingly high skill ceiling. Aside from keeping your engine cool, you can get free boosts from jumps as long as you perfectly time your boost right and hit it just as you start to take off. And while you're in the air, you can aim your car to the left and right as well as tilt it up and down, which either increases or decreases airtime, with more airtime giving you more speed again. All of this is done by tilting the Wii mode appropriately, and this is what I'd consider the true skill check for this game. Being able to navigate the dozens of jumps on the track without going off course, but getting the maximum amount of speed out of them is incredibly satisfying to get right. And just before your car hits the ground again, you can get an additional boost if you manage to make the car land flat on all wheels. If you combine all these things correctly, you can essentially chain endless amounts of boosts together. It's honestly exhilarating. Yet despite all my glazing, the controls and core gameplay aren't even my favorite part of Excite Truck. It's the tracks. Not only do they look surprisingly good for a, once again, Wii launch title, but they also provide great amounts of spectacle. Not only are the layouts perfectly designed with loads of opportunities for drifts and jumps, but also feature splitting paths. Unlike in many other racing games where there's one path that's clearly shorter and therefore faster, and therefore superior, in Excite Truck each split in the road is an active split-second decision you need to make. Do you want to take the shorter but oftentimes less eventful path to catch up a few places? Or do you want to take the longer path that is littered with opportunities to increase your score? There's never a clear right answer. But all of this gets trumped by the single best feature in the entire game: terramorphing. On every track there's various pickups which, upon collecting, quite literally transform the very geometry of the map. All of a sudden, an opportunity for a jump will be presented in front of you, or a hill caves in, giving way for a shortcut. And all of this works dynamically in the world, so you can use these to mess up opponents in front of you as well. It's genuinely such a simple but incredibly effective way to make each race more chaotic and exciting. I see why it's called Excite Truck now. And even if you don't collect any of these pickups, there's still loads going on within each track, like volcanoes erupting or entire castles collapsing in front of you. All while being served up with one of the most intense senses of speed the Wii has probably ever produced. Like genuinely, this game is absolute ADHD goodness distilled in its purest form. It was so hard to put down, I had to force myself to stop playing and start writing this incredibly incohesive script. You're still following along, right? Okay, let's take a step back then. Outside of the main campaign, there's a challenge mode which features various different minigames. I'll be honest, these mostly sucked. There's one where you need to drive between gates which get increasingly more narrow the further you get, which just doesn't really work with all of the mini jumps you tend to pick up along the way, and the controls in general just not being precise enough for this. Another minigame has you perform precise jumps through rings that get smaller the more you collect in succession. And while this is a little more reasonable, it can also be quite frustrating when you have no idea what kind of trajectory they were looking for.
What?
The last minigame drops you into an open but fairly small area where you need to chase down a handful of free-roaming cars and destroy them. While the idea sounds fun on paper, these events are incredibly easy as you're given way more time than needed, and opponent cars break even at the lightest touch. So yeah, overall the challenge mode just didn't really work for me as most of the events go against the chaotic nature of the game. For the most part they were pretty boring and unexciting. And that's gotta count as false advertisement. However, do I really care? Do I really care about some random mini games when the main game is such an adrenaline rush? Hell no! This has got to be the most fun I had with an arcade racer in ages. I'll definitely give this one 4.5 stars for sure. Man, I can't wait to look into this developer studio. They must be making some insane games these days. Do you think we could convince them to add jumps and boosts to this? Maybe plane crashes in the background? Tornadoes? No, just me? Okay. This game is a bit of a mess to untangle. Cruis'n is actually the name of an old racing game series dating back to the Nintendo 64, with Cruis'n USA and Cruis'n World being two of the more known examples. Though both of these were based off of arcade games where they originated from, they are more commonly seen as regular home console games these days. After the fourth Cruis'n game, which actually was not based on an arcade game this time, the franchise remained dormant for 6 years, and the owners of the IP, Midway, didn't seem to have any interest in releasing any more games under it. Then in 2001, the first Fast and Furious movie hit theaters. I know this seems like a wild transition, but it'll make sense in a second. Due to the movie's huge success, a lot of merchandise related to the movie was produced, and this included an arcade game which hit arcades in 2004. And then, some absolute genius had the fantastic idea to put these two franchises together. And so in 2007, yes, the arcade game was already dated back 3 years at this point, a port of the Fast and Furious arcade game was released for the Nintendo Wii, but not under the Fast and Furious name. Due to what I assume to be licensing issues, the game was instead swiftly rebranded, and is now, at least somewhat officially, part of the Cruis'n franchise. And since it is just called Cruis'n without any subtitle, along with a fairly long break in new releases in the franchise, it's fair to assume this is in fact a reboot of the series. One that's not even original and based on a foreign IP. They really just Frankensteined this thing together. But enough with the history lesson. How does Cruis'n for the Wii actually stack up? If reviews at the time are anything to go by, this should be the most spectacular dumpster fire I'll ever get to witness in the racing game genre. And in many ways, yeah, it is that dumpster fire. I'm just gonna make this one quick and painless, so strap in. The menus are butt ugly. The audio is completely broken, with sound effects only playing on the left ear. The load times make up about half of the game's playtime, which isn't even much to begin with considering I beat the main campaign in less than an hour. The car models must be a crime against humanity, or at least against the car manufacturers. Upgrades are completely broken in a sense where a better engine doesn't make the car faster at all. A spoiler supposedly does, which it doesn't. Instead, applying underglow of all things gave me an extra 10 miles per hour. The game had me fall through the map at one point, which ruined my race. The AI rubber bands more than every game I have ever played. And then there's this.
Race Wars.
What?
With all due respect, this is an objectively bad video game. So why on earth did I kind of enjoy it? Well, it's kind of like your usual greasy McDonald's burger. You know it's disgusting and probably not good for you, but sometimes you just don't care. Sometimes you just want some fast carbs and you crave a greasy, disgusting McDonald's burger. And that's how I view this game. Something about it was just barely fun enough to keep me hooked to see all the tracks this game has to offer. And besides, it's not like everything about this game stinks. In fact, the aforementioned tracks are actually really well put together. They're short and not that complicated, but you can tell a lot of attention to detail was put into them, especially those that are based on well-known cities like LA or San Francisco, featuring various famous landmarks to plow through. And in general, the sense of speed and handling are good enough to provide a certain thrill that kept me playing. With each race that you finish, you unlock the next track and an upgrade of your choice to apply to the car. And these upgrades looked so ridiculous, so stupid, that I just wanted to see how much worse looking these can get. Unfortunately, upgrades don't transfer over to other cars, so you're more or less stuck with your starter car if you want to get anywhere with these. All in all, Cruis'n for the Wii is basically video game fast food. It's not good, but in a twisted way, it's kind of fun. And more importantly, it's over before it becomes painful. I'll give it 1.5 stars. Can't believe I'm agreeing with IGN of all things for once. I'll be honest, after writing up my thoughts on Cruis'n, I wasn't sure if I was being a bit too lenient with the game. But after playing this next game called Build and Race, I think my opinion was justified. So in Build and Race, you can actually build your own tracks and then race on them. Yeah, very clever game title, I know. Before getting to the build part, however, I wanted to take a look at the various pre-made races and championships on offer. School district? Oh no. After all, the best way to get some inspiration is by taking in someone else's creations. But unfortunately, before I could even think about building my own tracks, I was immediately thrown off by the incredibly awkward controls and physics. While the motion controls themselves are fine enough, I never felt like I had a good idea what the car was doing at any given time. Sometimes the wheels would seemingly randomly lose traction and steer me way off the track. And it's not even actual loss of grip. Your car just gains super grip when it decides to ruin your race. I have to stress how often this happened for pretty much no reason. Even in cases where I could see why it happened, the direction of the car would almost always be so extreme that I had no way of countersteering and correcting the car. Driving in this game feels like walking on eggshells. Or rather, thriving on them, I suppose. And when that confidence in the game's handling is lost, it's hard to enjoy it in the first place. However, this still gets trumped by the game's god-awful physics. Jumps in this game feel so incredibly stiff, it's like there's no actual trajectory to the car. The car just flies through the air at a completely flat angle. It reminds me a little bit of The Crew 2, and yeah, it feels just as awkward as it looks. Then you can also get your car stuck on seemingly nothing. What the... Oh my god, dude. Yeah, I still don't know what happened here. And even if everything goes right, the car does this weird jittery motion every time you steer, which just looks incredibly odd. Undoubtedly, the actual driving part of this game is an absolute mess that's really hard to defend. Most of my playtime was honestly just miserable, because I was not looking forward to driving anymore. The races themselves are also nothing special. The AI might as well be non-existent. They're usually so far apart and uncompetitive that there's no challenge at all. Even in races where I had to reset my car more than 5 times, I would still finish in first place just fine. In fact, the AI would occasionally get stuck on various objects because the tracks were horribly designed. Like here, I had no way of knowing there's a corner coming up after this jump, and with the physics being as floaty as they are while you are in the air, I would crash my car constantly on this part, and still win just fine. Build and Race genuinely has one of my least favorite handling and physics models I have ever experienced in a racing game. And if that sounds like an exaggeration, it really isn't. I have played budget Nintendo DS games with better racing than this. There's a whole video on them. It's honestly shameful. Bundled up with a soundtrack that's so incredibly generic that I swear it came from some free rock music library, I was really looking forward to not having to play this again after this video. But before I can move on, we obviously have to talk about the other half of the game. You know, the build part of Build and Race. Here you can design your very own tracks entirely from scratch. Between choosing from various parts of the road, you can also decorate the track with a surprising amount of objects, ranging from construction sites, shops, and even skyscrapers. This is probably where the game shines the most, as you can build tracks that actually feel pretty legit. I tried to go for a mix of a Ridge Racer and FlatOut themed track, so you start off in a part that's dominated by skyscrapers, and later end up in a more open area with some smashables. And while this works on paper, it also comes with its own issues. For one, occasionally parts would just not connect. I tried to add an underground section to this track, but it wouldn't work for some reason. While this could very well have been a user error, I would have appreciated some kind of message that tells me what I'm doing wrong. Then on this part of the track, the physics just freak out for some reason. At first I thought it's because I ran over a chair that I got stuck on, but no, the car seems to lose traction every single time I drive over this part. It's like someone flooded the road with oil. And I would really appreciate if someone would light it up, so I don't have to play this anymore. But yeah, overall I guess I would call the track builder functional, though there are 3 grave issues with it. Number 1, you can't really add any proper elevation changes to the map. You can add roads that go up and down, but there's no way to move the height of objects and roads, so every track will end up being a variation of Sebring Speedway. Number 2, there's no way to share maps with anybody. Now I'll admit, maybe it's a bit unfair to expect online share functions on a Wii game from 2009. But without it, you're really just making these tracks for yourself. Granted, you could play these tracks with your friends in local multiplayer, but let's be honest, who the hell would ever decide to whip this game out at a sleepover or party over something like Smash Bros or Mario Kart? And lastly, number 3, what's the point of building tracks when racing on them makes me want to shove the Wiimote up my ass? What, did you expect to see this? No, but seriously, if the handling and physics are this bad, why even bother with building anything? I spent around 20 minutes building my map Shitopolis here, and when I finally took my first spin on it, I realized how much I just wasted my time. No matter what I build, no matter how creative my tracks are, driving on them will always be a pain with how terrible the driving feels in this game. And thinking back on it, I believe that's why I was willing to give Cruis'n a pass and still had some fun with it. The actual driving portion was at least solid, which I can't say about Build and Race, even if on the technical level it's more competent and offers more content. I just don't care about any of it, especially since the Wii has a TrackMania game on it, which I'm sure will be at least better than this. We'll get to it. So yeah, the worst game of the video so far, 1 star. Let's just move on. This is the first game where I went in with plenty of preconceived notions, as I not only played this one as a kid, but Need for Speed Nitro is also pretty notorious within the community for various reasons. Nonetheless, for the sake of the video, I'll try my best to be as objective as possible, without any outside factors influencing my opinion, and just break down the game from a neutral perspective. This game is fucking awesome! I am not even kidding, this is probably the single most misunderstood game in the entire Need for Speed series. So this game is actually a spin-off of the Need for Speed series, fully leaning into the arcade fun racer style. While the mainline series at the time was certainly over the top, it was mostly still rooted in realism with believable physics and graphics. With Nitro, they decided to completely ditch any form of realism and just create the most wacky, out there racing game they could make. And the result, at least in my humble opinion, is pretty great. I actually love the art style, which you could argue even directly inspired Need for Speed Unbound many years later, with both being heavily influenced by graffiti art. But I think despite the similarities, it works a million times better in Nitro because the entire game is built around it. It's got this cartoony look to it, which extends even to the car and character models. My main gripe with Unbound's art style was that it didn't really feel cohesive. So you had a realistic game world with cartoon effects tacked on and weirdly out of place looking character models. It's fine, but overall I actually prefer Nitro's art direction because every part of the game works together to create a more consistent look. Now this can be very hit and miss for some. I know some people who despise the way cars look in this game, but I actually find them incredibly charming. They remind me of old Hot Wheels and Matchbox cars I used to collect. And besides, if games like Koro Q can be praised for its fairly similar look, why can't this game? But that's all talking about visuals. Obviously what's most important is how the game actually plays. Which is where I once again will say that I actually quite enjoyed it. It's extremely over the top, with even low-end cars being able to reach high speeds and drifts being really easy to initiate. As usual, I did try to play this with motion controls, but this might be the first game where I wouldn't actually recommend them. Most of the time the car just doesn't feel responsive enough with them enabled, and drifting can be pretty difficult as well. Case in point, I couldn't for the life of me beat a time attack event, but the moment I switched to regular nunchuck controls, I beat the target time on my first try. So for the most part I stuck with regular control stick steering, but I kept the motion controls for Nitros enabled, which requires you to shake the Wii mode. This was actually incredibly satisfying. It kind of feels like riding a horse and shaking the leash to get it to run faster. One quirk about the handling model is that in corners, the car will automatically follow a certain line, so you'll rarely go too fast or too slow in corners. I can see this being a little irritating to some, but honestly it kind of reminds me of the later Ridge Racer games and how cars would also follow some kind of invisible rail in corners. And if Ridge Racer can get away with it, why not this one as well? The races themselves can actually be surprisingly chaotic, especially once police get involved. There's a similar system here as in the early GTA games, where the more chaos you cause, the higher your wanted level gets, which directly affects the aggressiveness of the police. While at times they can get somewhat annoying as you don't really have any tools to defend yourself with, it's up to you to not escalate the pursuit to this degree. So for example, there are shortcuts on each track you can make use of, but they always come with a catch. On every shortcut there's usually various objects placed in your way, which increase your wanted level upon hitting them. Since they're pretty hard to avoid, this makes shortcuts more of a strategic decision than an easy solution. Do you want to drive it safe and keep the cops behind? Or do you want to take the risk in hopes of making up a few places? The choice is yours. In general, racing in this game is quite a thrill, whether you're behind making your way through the chaos or ahead overwriting the town with your own graffiti. Which brings me to the customization. It's got some interesting features to it, which to this day I haven't seen again in another game. Outside of customizing your car, you can also create your own graffiti design. This is put together with a color, a background and a logo, the latter of which you can actually draw yourself. I'm pretty bad at this, truthfully, but maybe you can make out what I went for here. This design will then get painted all over the various tracks and cities as long as you're ahead, which is incredibly satisfying. The aforementioned car customization isn't anything to write home about, however, even if there is a full livery editor. I just found it a little hard to properly control the editor, so I didn't really bother with it too much. I suppose what I am missing are car upgrades, as is you can only buy cars if you want to get faster, so I think a simple upgrade system would have been appreciated here. Thankfully there is a decent variety of cars to choose from at least, and honestly it's probably one of the wildest car lists out of any Need for Speed game. I mean, your starter car choice is literally between a VW Type 2 bus and a Renault 4L. I don't even know what that is, but I know what a Nissan Cube is, and that you can customize it too. It's a wacky car list for a wacky racing game. I like it a lot. Prepped with your car of choice, you can tackle a surprisingly lengthy career mode, where you travel between 5 cities all around the world, each featuring a boss for you to work toward. Now these could not get any more ridiculous as far as national stereotypes go, but if Midnight Club 2 can get away with literally the same thing, why not also this game? In the career mode you have a surprising variety of events. Between your regular races, there's also drag races, time attacks, elimination races, races where you get to test drive faster cars, and a drift mode. The latter I didn't really get, cause the points required seemed way too high, but this might just be a skill issue. And it doesn't really matter anyways, because depending on your performance, you can get a certain amount of stars per event, which is what unlocks new events. So if you don't like a certain event type, you're free to just skip it. Last but certainly not least, I have to give some appreciation to the audio design in this game. Not only is there a genuinely good soundtrack with plenty of great songs in there, but also car sounds are way better than I expected. Coupled with very satisfying sound effects for nitrous, you get a game that just sounds really good. Have a listen. So yeah, overall I can't stop gushing about this game. Maybe it's because I bounced off one of the worst racing games I've played in recent months, but Need for Speed Nitro is just plain fun to play. I love the commitment to sheer creativity here. Between the car models, art style and sound design, it's exactly the kind of game we'd never get again these days. It's unapologetically wacky and unapologetically itself. And in the year of our Lord, current year, it's something I've grown to appreciate more. You don't have to like this game to the same degree as me, but hating on it for being weird and different is just cringe to me. I mean, it's a Wii spin-off for Christ's sake. What did people expect? So yeah, I'll give it 4.5 stars. My favorite game so far.
Play 6.
Deciding to put an F1 game on this list was an interesting decision, as this is actually a primarily sim racing franchise, especially these days. Having played a few of the more modern ones, I was curious to see where the series got its start, and learning that it basically started off as a Wii game of all things was certainly surprising. In essence, there are two ways you can play F1 2009. Either as a sim racer by disabling all assists, enabling damage and penalties, as well as full-length races with pit stops, or as a casual arcade racer with simplified handling and shorter races. Boldly, I decided to play it like a sim racer first, once again with full motion controls, in cockpit view, while playing the career mode, which simulates full race weekends including practice and qualifying. And on paper, this really works. You get to choose a contract between two teams, where you then have to work your way up to better teams as the season progresses. You get to experience full race weekends, but can also skip out on practice and qualifying if you want to just dive into the race straight away. I decided to at least do a qualifying run so that I can get familiar with the handling. And, well, it's not exactly great, but it works if you put in the effort. It's hard to speak on this, as my only point of reference are the modern F1 games, which not only have better physics calculation, but also modern F1 cars that generally drive a lot better than the older models from 2009. So for example, when I say that wheel spin is pretty abundant and hard to avoid here, I can't say if that's an issue with the game, an issue with me, or just how these cars handle if you push them too hard. All I can say is that it was pretty irritating. And I think the culprit is that while you can smoothly steer the F1 cars thanks to the motion controls, your throttle input is still digital. From the modern F1 games, I know that throttle control is extremely important when accelerating out of corners. And since in F1 2009 you're stuck with button presses, it's a bit of a pain. You can somewhat mitigate this by tapping the throttle button, but I wasn't exactly a fan either way. In general, I noticed that grip behaves pretty weirdly here, no matter what tire compound I'm using. It's actually surprisingly difficult to get the car to fully spin out. You can even hear the rear wheels spinning if you're using too much throttle out of a corner, but the car will rarely ever actually spin out, even with all assists disabled. So for a sim racer, I think it's actually a little too easy to control the car, especially considering you have no force feedback through the Wii mode. In general, I think people who want a sim racing experience out of F1 2009 will find the experience falling pretty short overall. Damage and penalties are way too lenient in this game, and the AI doesn't really try to avoid collisions either. I could hear loads of bumping pretty much every time I had the pack behind me in a race. But what about people who enjoy arcade races? Could they perhaps be more satisfied with tweaked settings and regular stick controls? Not really. I think playing in the exterior cam somewhat exposes what feels so strange about the grip in this game. The best way I can explain it is that the cars feel and look like they are floating on the surface. And for lack of a better word, the handling and racing overall just doesn't have any bite to it. With all assists enabled, the cars drive even easier than before, and as a result the driving lacks any sort of depth and becomes quite brainless, even for an arcade racer. For people who don't have the patience to go through full race weekends, there's a separate challenge mode available which puts you in various scenarios and different cars. These hardly get any more interesting than having to pass a bunch of cars or a regular arcade-style checkpoint race. At worst, they put you in scenarios that are just plain unfun to drive. So for example, there's one event where you need to win a race in the rain without using wet tires. The idea itself already sounds pretty dumb, but in execution this further exposes the shortcomings of the game. Usually, using slicks in the rain should result in the car sliding all over the place. But here, it just means that you understeer heavily through every corner to the point where it just becomes painful. It's just not a fun scenario, neither on paper nor in execution. So what's left then? Well, for what it's worth, it's a pretty commendable attempt to put a sim racer onto the Wii, even if it falls short in various areas. If you are a fan of F1, particularly the 2009 season, there's probably more you can appreciate, like the driver and track roster. And yeah, it is pretty impressive that you can accurately simulate an entire year of F1 on the Wii. But for me, I found myself just bored for the most part. With the cars lacking any sort of bite, no matter how you tweak the settings, and the general lack of competent AI, damage and penalties, I was simply bored for most of the time. And honestly, I don't see much reason to pick this game up again these days, other than for novelty's sake. Unless you love F1 and would like to see firsthand where the modern F1 games got their start, there's really no reason to play this one anymore. And despite my general lack of knowledge and experience with F1 games as a whole, I'm willing to bet there were better and more interesting ones available both before and after this game. I wouldn't say F1 2009 sucks, but it left me thoroughly whelmed. So I'll give this one 2.5 stars. Alright, well, didn't think I'd ever get to review a Spongebob game, but here we are. Spongebob's Boating Bash is pretty much exactly what you'd expect. Shameless shovelware that solely exists to trick parents into thinking they're buying their kids a good game based on the character they already like. And effectively, that's exactly what it is. I'm just gonna rip the band-aid off and give it to you straight. This game is garbage. Real garbage. And if you played this as a kid, I feel sorry for you. You deserved better. Now in concept, putting SpongeBob into a racing game makes fairly little sense, since he is canonically a terrible driver. Worse than Nikita Mazepin perhaps, but that's debatable. So in order for this game to make any sense and justify its existence, what we have here is a destruction derby type game. In this game's story mode, and I'm putting story in fat quotation marks here, SpongeBob once again fails his driver's license test, which actually acts as a quick tutorial for the controls. He's then picked up by Seymour, who runs a different kind of driving school that specifically teaches you how to be a terrible driver, so that you know how not to be one yourself. Yeah, I'm not even gonna pretend this makes any sense, but who actually cares? Before I move on though, I will say that the cutscenes look pretty bad. While the voice acting is actually pretty good with many returning voice actors from the show, everything about the animation honestly just looks really bad. The cutscenes aren't even funny, and I still laugh about SpongeBob memes, jokes and episodes. In fact, I only find it funnier as I get older. So to take all of these characters and make it not funny is almost impressive. Impressively incompetent.
Now, what's with all the racket?
Oh, we were helping SpongeBob get his license.
Helping? SpongeBob? License? Did I miss something? Patrick's been living under a rock, not me!
Equally incompetent is pretty much everything about the gameplay. Now granted, my only comparisons as far as Destruction Derby games go are the FlatOut games and Wreckfest, which are basically the cream of the crop. But naturally, I didn't expect it to be as good as either of these. But for it to not even be remotely better than the likes of Dirt Showdown is just sad. I suppose the worst thing about the derby racing in this game is that it lacks any kind of spectacle. The cars, or boats rather, can't really flip over or gain any sort of momentum upon hitting them. It's honestly more comparable to bumper cars, and it's not even a fun iteration of that, as everything is incredibly slow and the arenas are very tiny and uninteresting. The damage model, another thing that would be very important for a Destruction Derby game, exists, so that's good. But it's not really interesting either. You can lose various body panels and that's really about it. None of it affects the handling or how much damage you're able to deal, it's just there. And overall, the actual driving feels awkwardly stiff. Now you could argue, well, you're not driving actual cars on land, you're driving boats on tiny tires deep in the ocean. And to that I would say, yeah, you're right. And I don't care. There are a handful of actual races in this game where you go a little faster than usual, but every car just grips without issues. There's no traction loss or anything of that kind. But maybe that would be expecting just a tad too much from what's essentially a kid's game. Regardless, that still doesn't mean I need to forgive everything just because the bar is exceedingly low. In fact, I found the derbies incredibly disorienting as the FOV of the camera is really low for some reason. And with the game not supporting a widescreen ratio, I had a really hard time orienting myself. I typically found myself looking at the minimap more often than the rest of the game, which was especially obvious in a certain event type. Apart from trying to cause as much damage as possible, there are events where other cars will drop car parts you need to collect once they take damage. This here was probably my least favorite event type of them all, because you don't actually engage in the car combat, but rather drive around collecting these car parts that the NPCs keep losing all over the place. Some events feature arenas with what are essentially bottomless pits, except they're not bottomless, but still immediately have you fail the event. How very fun. As you might notice, I'm starting to sound more and more like Squidward as I'm describing this game, so let's just wrap it up quickly. Spongebob's Boating Bash is nothing but shovelware junk that makes me feel bad for every poor kid who got it for Christmas. Literally play any other Destruction Derby game, and I really mean any. Or hell, any other Spongebob game for that matter, if you're more interested in that. I'll give this game half a star. Half a Patrick star, you could say. God, this game is so unfunny, I swear it's rubbing off on me. We're moving on. And here we have what's, surprisingly, our second arcade game port onto the Wii. That's right, GTA Club Supermini Festa. Wait, isn't it supposed to be Fiesta? What the hell is a Festa? Anyway, this game was originally an arcade game too, much like Cruis'n, which we covered earlier, only without any funny trademark IP shenanigans. In fact, it's actually the third iteration of the game, adding new courses and cars to play around with. Additionally, the distribution of the Wii game in Europe was reportedly disrupted due to an ongoing series of volcanic eruptions in Iceland? Yeah, that was a real thing. Europeans had a hard time getting to play this game due to volcanoes. There's your daily dose of useless video game trivia. In any case, it's thankfully not 2010 anymore, and no volcanoes could stop this European from playing GTI Club this time. As you would expect from an arcade game port to the Wii, it does play very arcade-like. Tracks are over the top, tire grip is more of a suggestion, and overall you can tell this game wasn't really made with the Wii in mind, as it's hardly using any other motion controls other than the tried and true tilt steering. But that's all fine, because GTI Club Supermini Festa is actually great for the Nintendo Wii regardless. Now this is where I have to mention that I played this, and all of the other Wii games in this video, entirely alone. And the problem with this one in particular is that you can really tell it's meant to be played with others. From playing party game modes on your own to only having one other opponent in single player races, playing GTI Club without someone to share the experience with was somewhat alienating. Thankfully though, I didn't mind it all too much, as even alone this game was still pretty fun. But I could tell that this game could only really shine if you have friends to play it with. So what is it you even do in GTI Club? Well, the game's most notable quirk is that the entire car list consists of only budget hatchbacks and everyday cars. You won't find any Lamborghinis or Porsches here, but instead VW Polos and Mini Coopers. I actually really love this, especially because each car can be customized in fun ways, like turning your cars into police or taxi vehicles. Reflect changes to car, yes or okay? God damn it. Customization is unlocked gradually as you progress through the admittedly pretty simple career mode. You make your way through various events across the 5 major locations the game has to offer, and for the most part this is all great stuff. For one, I actually love the track designs here. Not only do the tracks look very detailed, But in general, the graphics are probably the best we've seen yet. Seriously, for a Wii game, this game does look surprisingly good, even if at this point in time the 7th console generation was already well underway. But the tracks don't just look good, they're also fun to drive on, with tons of extreme elevation changes and loads of traffic. It's funny actually, you never actually drive all that much faster than 100 kilometers per hour, at least in the early hours of the game. Yet the game still manages to feel fast when you're playing it, thanks to the over-the-top track design and dense traffic. As I mentioned, in single player, you're only ever facing one AI opponent in races, and most of the time they're not exactly competitive either. So unfortunately the races themselves aren't really too exciting, but that's where the good track designs come in to keep your attention. Outside of regular races, you can also participate in various party game modes, which are honestly very creative. Besides the usual tag and king minigames you've probably seen in other racing games before, there's also a minigame where you have to shoot other cars with tomatoes, or one where you have to collect more coins than your opponent, or probably the most fun one, car soccer. Now, I have quite a few hours in Rocket League, so naturally I assumed I'd be killing it in car soccer here. But I think the footage speaks for itself here. Yeah, I just kinda sucked at this. And admittedly, this would probably be way more fun with 4 players, but still this was a great diversion from the usual racing. With each event that you clear, you rack up points, depending on how well you were doing. These points can then unlock new visual customization or allow you to upgrade the performance of your current car. You might also unlock new cars this way, and unlike in Cruis'n, at least some of your upgrades do transfer over to new cars, so you can actually experiment with other cars in this one. Thank you. In fact, this game is very generous with giving you new stuff pretty much all the time, which makes for a very satisfying gameplay loop. In my opinion, this is a great example for a racing game not needing an overly complex campaign with tons of underlying systems. Sometimes, just giving you a handful of fun events and constantly rewarding you with even more fun unlocks is more than enough to keep me engaged. I was so engaged, in fact, that I could overlook some of the game's shortcomings, like the sometimes kinda janky handling and physics. Yeah, sometimes the cars would awkwardly crab walk or gain way more grip at lower speeds, but overall it's nothing that detracts from the experience too much, unless physics is all you care about. But in that case, I think this is not the right kind of game for you. GTI Club is really all about simple, wacky fun with everyday cars that you might even own yourself. And I think that's undoubtedly charming. I can totally see myself coming back to this one someday with more players. After all, you can play through the main career mode in multiplayer as well, which is extra cool. So yeah, GTI Club Supermini Festa. I still think it's supposed to be Fiesta. Anyway, 4 out of 5 stars. Next up we have a game I have briefly mentioned before, and it's... Wait, hold up. You hearing this? Yeah, I don't know why the intro to this game went that hard, but it did. So, right, TrackMania Build to Race is what seems like an adaptation of TrackMania United Forever onto the Wii. The reason it's not a direct port is the tracks themselves being different, as well as noticeable changes within the physics we'll get to. Other than that, it's your standard TrackMania affair. You can go hunt medals in pre-made tracks across various environments and car types, or go build your very own track. The only major difference this time being the motion controls. And I have to say that playing TrackMania like this was certainly a strange experience. And admittedly, not a very good one. After a while I noticed both a pretty awful dead zone with the steering, as well as a bad linearity with the steering itself. Let me break it down for you. So if you want to do any fine steering with the motion controls, which could have been the main benefit of playing with them, you're basically shit out of luck, as the steering only responds at like around 5 degrees of tilt on the Wii mode. At which point the car will already steer way too much to make any kind of fine adjustments, which is especially important in a game like TrackMania. And then once you want to steer a little more, the car tends to steer way too much, which is what I meant with the steering linearity not being tuned properly. You never really have to steer all the way with the Wii mode, as the steering itself is already way too sensitive. This led to more restarts than necessary, so after a while I switched to stick controls with the nunchuck, which worked miles better. So with this game's main gimmick being more or less useless, what's left is still a pretty decent TrackMania game. Now for games of this series, both the physics and tracks are undoubtedly the most important thing, and since I am still far from a TrackMania expert, I can't really give you any meaningful insight on how they stack up against the main PC games. What I can say is that they feel somewhat downgraded, particularly obvious with the physics being just a little off, at least from what I remember. Same with the tracks. They're not exactly horrible, but some of them did have what felt like purposefully deceptive track design that just felt cheap each time I fell for it. Other than that, I can really only compare this game to other Wii racing games I've played so far, and to that end, I think this game still holds up pretty well, which probably says more about how low the bar is than anything else. Particularly great is the variety of events here. There are 6 event types represented here which all feel distinctively different, with only Bay missing from the PC version. My favorite between these is easily Island with its fast speeds and giant tracks, while my least favorite probably has to go to Rally, though I do blame the motion controls for this one, as I usually liked Rally quite a bit over on the PC. Between these different event types you can also notice rather jarring graphical differences, which did throw me for a loop. While Rally and Desert actually look rather bad, Coast probably boasts some of the best visuals we've seen yet on the Wii. It's quite bizarre. Besides the usual races, there are also 2 additional game modes. In Platform, you're not actually racing to be the fastest, but rather trying to survive a track littered with obstacles, while using as few resets as possible. In all honesty, outside of the different track designs, this one didn't feel all too different to regular races, as in those you pretty much have to complete tracks flawlessly without resets anyways, if you want to get any other medal than bronze. And in general, my problem with both of these is that they're too short. Races can be as short as 15 seconds, which would be fine if I didn't need to go back to the menu and sit through another loading screen again, and again, only to beat the next race within a few seconds and repeat the entire cycle. The only game mode that didn't make me suffer through loading screen repetition was Puzzle, which is probably my favorite event type. This one combines the track editor with the actual racing portion of the game, needing you to complete an unfinished track using only a limited selection of parts, and then finish the track as quickly as possible. I'll talk more about the track editor later, but this game mode I did have a lot of fun with. Different to the PC TrackManias is the added progression and currency in this one. So for starters, most events are locked and you need to basically buy out access to them with points you earn for earning medals on other tracks. This actually works in the game's favor, as you can pick and choose which event types interest you the most, rather than forcing you to complete all event types to unlock the next set. So for example, you can just beeline it through Stadium if that's the only thing you care about. Points can also be exchanged for liveries, or skins as they're called here, and... wait. Is that supposed to be... China? I'll be honest here, most of these skins kinda sucked, so I didn't spend anything here. Alternatively, you can also exchange points for new parts in the track builder, and this I genuinely hate. If this was mostly decorative items, then fine. But some of the most basic track parts like boosts or ramps need to be bought here. And as such, the shop is massively bloated with basic parts you have to slowly buy one after another. That is, if you even unlock the ability to buy them in the first place. That's right, you still need to earn a large amount of medals before you're even able to buy most of the parts and, in the end, have a feature-complete track builder. As such, I didn't really bother with the track builder in the first place, because after all, why even build a track if I'm working with only a fraction of the parts and items available? Thankfully, the track builder itself seems mostly fine. Placing down parts with the Wii cursor was a little harder than appreciated, but it got the job done. What did scare me was the build limit on here. Like, you're really trying to tell me that this cobbled up tiny piece of garbage already hits 10% of the build limit? I didn't exactly have high praises for Build and Race's track editor, but considering the crazy stuff you can put there in a fairly short amount of time, makes TrackMania's track editor look rather puny in comparison. Though overall, TrackMania's one is still generally superior as it has more features, such as adjusting the height of platforms. So in the end, what we have here is a mixed bag as far as TrackMania games go. It's noticeably downgraded and obfuscated with a pointless shop, but as far as Wii racing games go, it's one of the more fun ones out there. I'll give it 3.5 stars. And honestly, that half star is entirely thanks to the soundtrack, which goes way harder than it has any right to. Oh boy, where to even begin with this game? Need for Speed Hot Pursuit probably doesn't need much of an introduction, especially given how it has gotten a remaster in 2020. Going into this, I wasn't exactly sure what to expect, as I was fairly confident this wasn't going to simply be a downgraded port of the main game. But what I got instead, I could not have come up in my wildest dreams. So get this, Need for Speed Hot Pursuit on the Wii is a kart racer. Yes, they actually attempted to bank on the Mario Kart audience with this one. You know, the one who has already been playing Mario Kart on the Wii for 2 years at that point. What happened here? This isn't even remotely recognizable as Hot Pursuit anymore. If anything, it's got more in common with Blur. In fact, my conspiracy theory is that this game is a scrapped Wii port of Blur, which got repurposed to hold the Hot Pursuit title. Cause look at this, there's an item in Blur called Shockwave, which pushes all surrounding cars out of the way. And in Hot Pursuit on the Wii, there's an item called Soundwave, which does the exact same thing. Oh! And now I am deaf. All in all, this has to be one of the most straight-up scams I have ever seen as far as game ports go. To be fair, this has happened before in the case of Carbon on the City, which is also quite different to the regular Need for Speed Carbon, but that one has a subtitle to make it obvious it's a different game, and even then, it still preserves the general tone of the main game. This game does not have a single thing in common with its main counterpart, outside of the car list and soundtrack, the latter of which has been butchered with unnecessary instrumental versions and very questionable omissions. Like, why is Born Free in here, arguably the worst song in the entire game, but Watercolor is absent? That has to be a crime. It's funny thinking back how Most Wanted 2012 was hated as much as it was for deviating so much from the original Most Wanted. Yet this here is an even worse example of the exact same thing. I mean, the games even share the same cover art. It almost borders on false advertisement, and I feel bad for everyone who bought into this game back then, rightfully expecting, well, anything but this. But okay, we're obviously here to judge these games based on their own merit. So is Need for Speed Hot Pursuit on the Wii at least fun and worth playing? My answer to that question would be a resounding no. A hell no, in fact. Once again, the motion controls barely even function here. With them enabled, every car feels incredibly sluggish and hard to get around corners. It's almost like the cars don't have enough grip. Actually, in fact, that's exactly what's going on, because the moment I switched to Nunchuck, the same car felt way more responsive. I genuinely think they messed up the steering angle here, and it's the only game so far I would call unplayable with motion controls. Without them, the handling feels fine, at times even somewhat decent, but that's still brought down by the atrocious physics. In all honesty, this has to be one of the worst physics models in Need for Speed history. Oh my god, dude! First off, there's basically moon gravity. Or maybe the developers genuinely think China is on the moon somewhere. Collisions feel completely off, which makes for some strange interactions that never feel consistent whatsoever. There's also an aggressive auto-balance system in place, which is painfully noticeable in certain situations. Driving in this game is sheer chaos. The physics go haywire pretty much in every race, and it always feels like you're at the mercy of its broken implementation. This isn't helped either by the track designs, which have your car go airborne all the time, usually also right ahead of corners. Very fun. You can mitigate all of this with the autopilot power-up, one of the best and worst power-ups I have ever seen in a game like this. For a few seconds, the game will ignore all laws of physics and logic and essentially play itself. All you have to do is watch. It's actually incredibly broken, which makes it feel really unfair if opponents are using it to pass you at speeds they should never even have. What the hell, man? The worst part about the racing in this game, however, is that it gets boring surprisingly quickly. The main career mode drags you through a handful of locations, but unlike in Need for Speed Nitro, you're actually stuck to one location at a time, meaning you'll drive on the same tracks over and over again before you're allowed to move on. The races are grouped in sets of events, but each event always has the same 4 types of races, only ordered slightly differently each time. The most notable event type out of these is probably the one that puts 100 cars into a single race. This is where the game reaches a level of chaos that's almost entertaining. But I have to wonder if downgrading the game's graphics just for the sake of putting 100 cars onto one track was really worth it. Because yeah, this game does look pretty ugly. In fact, I'd say it doesn't look all too different from the usual shovelware garbage you could find on the Wii. If you suffer through enough races, you get to race against the boss, which will unlock the next location. And this boss race is pretty weird. It puts you into a pseudo-open world where you have to race to get 2 out of 3 flags faster than your opponent. It feels incredibly gimmicky and also unfair. Like, why is my first boss already driving a Ford GT? If you're sick of racing, which I wouldn't blame you for, you can spend some of your accumulated bounty on new cars and customization. I love how this doesn't even make sense. Like, you can't pay with a bounty. While the car list is actually pretty fine, nowhere near as interesting as Need for Speed Nitro's, the customization is actually the worst in the entire Need for Speed series. Besides a small selection of rims, all you have is one body kit per car. It's actually nothing. The livery editor returns in this one, and I actually do appreciate the way they laid it out here. You're basically drawing on a blueprint of the car, which makes designing liveries a lot more precise. Too bad that the livery editor seems completely non-functional, as my car turned black after I was done, with my livery disappearing entirely and not being able to add anything anymore. Very cool. So, there you have it. Need for Speed Hot Pursuit on the Wii was nothing more than a shameless cash grab and is undoubtedly one of the most bastardized games in the entire franchise. I will admit, it almost reaches the so bad it's good again status, but I just could not get over the blatant name theft. This is not Hot Pursuit, and they knew it. I just feel bad for everyone who felt lied to by this fever dream of a game, and thus I'm giving it just 1 star. Originally, I was going to give this one 2 stars, but I decided to detract 1 for the permanent hearing damage this game caused to children all around the world. Next up, we got a rather surprising addition. I didn't know the FlatOut series had an entry on the Wii, so I was pretty intrigued going into this one. The FlatOut series is actually my favorite Destruction Derby franchise, so much so that I even got all achievements in FlatOut Ultimate Carnage on Steam. So, what's a FlatOut game look like on the Nintendo Wii? No. No. We all know where this is going, so let's just sum this one up real quick. Physics, atrocious. Graphics, awful. Sound, terrible. Races, boring. Stunt mode, unplayable. Derbies, lame. In every conceivable way, this game is an insult. Giving this game to somebody might as well be the equivalent to taking a shit on their living room table. There's absolutely nothing of value here that would save this game even for the most die-hard fans. You have to be several layers deep in delusion to convince yourself this game is worth playing. If it wasn't obvious enough, this game is pretty much FlatOut 3, or at least an early rendition of it. For those not in the know, FlatOut 3 has held the title for the worst rated game on Steam for many years. If you want to learn more, I made a video playing through that game in its entirety. Yeah, don't ask why I subjected myself to that, I don't know either. And FlatOut on the Wii is basically a tech demo of it. And a really bad one at that. A tech demo for one of the worst racing games known in existence. I could go into intricate detail on how this game falls short in several areas, like the controls, the gameplay, or the content. But what's the point? Show, don't tell, as they say. And I think what I'm showing here should tell you more than enough. The only noteworthy addition in this game over FlatOut 3 is this game mode where you can trash a car using various objects. I picked a metal pipe. All you do here is shake the Wiimote like an idiot. It kind of reminds me of that weird browser game where you smash the PC. Does anyone remember that? And that's literally it. There's hardly even anything to do in this game. The derby mode only has a single arena and nothing to unlock. It's pathetic. There's little to no objects on the road, and you don't get any boost from smashing them either. Wasn't this the entire point of FlatOut? What a disgraceful game. Not even worth a single star. In fact, I'd rather shove this metal pipe up my ass than play this again. Alright, next up we got another brand tie-in game. This one being...
Hot Wheels Track Attack!
Yeah, that one. Hot Wheels has had a fairly extensive history with racing games, most of which I'm not that familiar with. In truth, the only Hot Wheels games I played were both of the Unleashed games, which I actually enjoyed quite a bit. With Track Attack being several years older and on the Wii, I obviously didn't expect anything on the same quality standard. But unfortunately, I might have to break some people's hearts here, as I know some of you probably look back on this game fondly with loads of nostalgia. Hot Wheels Track Attack is just terribly mid. It's nowhere near as bad as the last game we looked at, but you can tell that not a whole lot of effort was put into this game. Which makes sense, as this game was developed by Firebrand Games, who used to make like 5 games a year, most of which being budget Nintendo DS ports that were mostly inferior to the versions they were trying to adapt. But okay, so what about Hot Wheels Track Attack is actually good? For one, I do like the selection of cars. I'm not too familiar with Hot Wheels anymore, even though I loved collecting them until I was like 10, but there's a pretty wide variety of models here which, at least for its time, look pretty solid. There's even models from Acceleraces in here, which I know some people get insanely excited over, so those are cool to see. You can also mildly customize the livery of them as well as upgrade the performance, even though all of it is pretty basic. Moving on to the gameplay, it's nice to say that after 3 games with terrible motion controls, this one actually controls fine. The handling itself is nothing exactly to write home about, it's really rather simplistic even for an arcade racer, but thanks to the decent motion controls, I still managed to have fun with it. Physics can get a little weird, though I'm fine with chalking this up to the cars being very light, because, you know, they're toy cars. However, it's the tracks I am rather split on. On one hand, there's plenty of boosts, jumps and loops sprinkled all over which keep things interesting. But overall, I feel like a lot of potential was missed with these. There's only 4 environments in total, and most of these don't really consist of actual Hot Wheels track parts. For a majority of every race, you're just on rather basic terrain with only a few track parts sprinkled in haphazardly. When I think Hot Wheels, I think over-the-top tracks. And these are really lame for the most part, because the actual track parts are very rarely even used. But on the plus side, the tracks do seem pretty lively, especially the one in the city with a giant robot causing havoc everywhere. There's another one with a giant spider crawling around, which I am deliberately not showing because it even creeped me out. In fact, let me update another Wikipedia page while I'm at it. It's just a shame that there's almost no opponents here to keep them lively more consistently, and they usually cannot keep up whatsoever either. I get that this is supposed to be a game primarily for children, but these races really were too easy. I would pass everyone right away on the start and then never see another opponent again for the rest of the race, even if I made mistakes along the way. There are other game modes that are mildly more challenging, but honestly these were mostly boring. The one that has you go through checkpoints was infuriating in fact, because the autopilot at the start would put me in an awkward position pretty much every time. There's another event type where you need to collect tokens across an open but very basic map. Not really that fun either. Overall, I just found myself bored surprisingly quickly here. There's something about this game that feels rather cheap, and this becomes most obvious with the track builder. Of course you can't have a Hot Wheels game without one, but in all honesty, this is the single worst track builder I have ever seen in a racing game. The way it works is that you have to start by drawing a map with the cursor, which already doesn't work that well. And then you are limited to this exact layout. You can redraw certain parts of it, but it always needs to come down to a full lap, something that the game will do itself if you don't do it yourself. And then you are confined to this layout. You cannot place parts freely and then connect them later, but you can only attach or rather replace parts of the track with new parts. This severely limits the amount of things you can do, as most of the time I spent trying to put certain parts onto the track, only to learn that they would just not fit. And it's not like there's much to put down either. There's only 2 measly pages of track parts you can pick from. You cannot change the elevation of parts either, so forget about building tracks with big jumps or anything of that sort. It's so unbelievably basic and gives you no room for creativity. And if that wasn't enough, the environment of the track also looks terrible. I really don't get this. Firebrand Games has made far better track builders on the Nintendo DS. Why does this one suck so much? And in a Hot Wheels game of all things. It's insultingly bad. So yeah, I hope this conveys why I felt so underwhelmed by this game. It just feels like a lot of potential was thrown out of the window for what could have been a genuinely awesome Hot Wheels game. The way I see it, there's no reason to play this one anymore today, other than out of nostalgia. In hindsight, it actually made me appreciate the Unleashed games even more, especially the second one, because of how much they got right. So if you're itching for a Hot Wheels racing game, go for those instead, as Track Attack is only getting 2.5 stars from me. What a shame. How many of these Wikipedia articles do I gotta edit? Alright, anyways. I bet most of you didn't even know Driver San Francisco had an official Wii version. This is probably the game I was looking forward to the most, as Driver San Francisco is actually one of my favorite racing games of all time. To this day, it is one of the most creative works in the racing genre, boasting so many cool ideas and concepts. It's a game that we will truly never see again. Until now. Since the original version of Driver San Francisco was made with the 7th console generation, aka the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 in mind, I was very curious how this Wii version was going to look like. After all, there was no way they could just downgrade the graphics and call it a day. The Wii would simply not be powerful enough. So what they did instead is build an entirely different game with its own map, story, and content. For all intents and purposes, the Wii version of Driver San Francisco has little to nothing in common with its original counterpart. But is that a good thing? Well, that entirely depends on how they pulled it off. We just looked at the Need for Speed Hot Pursuit and how much the Wii version deviated, and not exactly in a good way. Putting all that aside though, let me just get straight to the point. This is easily the most impressive Wii racing game I have ever seen. But let's take this one step after another. Initially, I had a bit of a chuckle once I realized the menu sounds were gunshots. It just reminds me too much of Shadow the Hedgehog, the edgiest game ever made. Apart from that though, the menus actually look really clean, with some nice animations. Going into the story mode, we follow the footsteps of undercover detective John Tanner, but this time on an entirely different case. Before he's led on the case though, he needs to pass a test to make sure he's up to the task. And this is where my anxiety immediately skyrocketed, as the first mission is a callback to the parking garage tutorial from the very first Driver game. You know, more commonly known as the hardest tutorial in video game history. See, I told you it's a horror game. Thankfully this time, it's nowhere near as difficult and just introduces you to some of the game's mechanics. Because shockingly, this game requires a nunchuck this time. The tried and true tilt steering we've been using in every single racing game thus far is actually not available here. And that's because this game gets a million times more creative with its motion controls than I could have ever imagined. So for one, you can launch your car forwards or to either side by swinging the Wiimote accordingly. This works surprisingly well and actually becomes incredibly satisfying later on when you use it to take down crooks. It makes each chase feel much more involved. Additionally, you have Nitrous, which you can use by swinging your nunchuck up, and I'll admit this did get a little tiresome after a while. Upon completing the tutorial, you'll get on with your second mission, aptly called Back on the Streets, named after the second Driver game. It's honestly really cool to see so much homage being paid to the rest of the series. You can tell the people who worked on this were fans of the series themselves, and it shows. Once you leave the garage, you'll quickly find out that the entire game will take place in an actual open world. Yes, this is the first and probably only true open world racing game in this video. And it's a good one too, with lots of traffic, hidden shortcuts, and distinct areas including many famous landmarks of San Francisco. There's also various collectibles and stunt jumps, which will unlock concept art and character bios, which I find pretty neat. This is also where I realized how genuinely great the handling and physics feel. The cars feel like real cars with weight to them. You can see the suspension do its work, drifts feel incredibly natural coupled with some genuinely fun crash physics. It's easily the best a Wii racing game has felt to play so far. I actually had a lot of fun just driving around in this one, exploring the map and collecting XP, which you can invest into various skills. These can either improve the performance of your cars, help uncover more collectibles, or improve your various abilities I'll touch on in a second. From this point on, you can also access your garage, where you can switch cars you've obtained throughout the game, or tackle various side missions. It's a bit of a shame that most car brands didn't make it over from the original game, so you'll have a mix of real and fictional cars in this one. Though obviously I mostly stuck to Tanner's classic Dodge Challenger. Missions are also incredibly varied. Between standard races and takedown missions, you have other missions as well that take advantage of the Wii's motion controls. Unfortunately, tailing missions are pretty abundant here as well, at least in the first few chapters of the game, but those are kept a little more interesting using the motion controls. There's even full-blown rail shooter segments where you get to cause some real havoc on the city. It's pretty over the top, and I love it. In general, it's hard to ever truly get bored with this game thanks to all of the ideas it keeps throwing at you. A major strength of the original game that has been maintained here, albeit in a different way. Later in the game, you'll get additional abilities, one of which lets you slow down the game akin to Need for Speed Speedbreaker, and equally as useful here, the other one letting you whip out a straight-up gun to decimate your opponents with. The interesting thing about these is that both of them and the Nitrous all share the same, let's call it energy bar. So you'll have to juggle which ability you need the most at any given moment, as you'll never be able to use everything at once, with the guns especially only being available once the bar is almost full. It adds a decent layer of strategy to the game and incentivizes you to drive risky with close calls and drifting. So all in all, Driver San Francisco is so much more than I could have hoped for. We have a story that's genuinely interesting, featuring great characters with stellar voice acting. Fun gameplay with fresh ideas and a solid driving model. An open world that feels somehow more lived in than most close track races we've seen so far. With games like this one, I once thought that the best thing they could be was mere replacements for the original. But Driver San Francisco on the Wii showed me that's only the second best thing, as it is not just a replacement, but a supplement to the original game that manages to stand strongly on its own 2 feet. It doesn't cheapen itself with downgraded gameplay mechanics and copied, shrunken down content. It has its very own identity that still stays true to what made this series great in the first place, while not deviating too far from what its original counterpart established. It manages to push the boundaries of what the Wii is capable of and ends up creating something truly great and unique in the process. Driver San Francisco on the Wii is the best thing that could have happened. The closest thing to a sequel of one of the greatest racing games we will never get. And that is why it deserves no less than 5 out of 5 stars.
Well done, I'm impressed.
When it comes to wacky racing games, I think the following game fits that description the most. It even has one of the wackiest names I've ever heard. Jimmie Johnson's Anything with an Engine. I just got no clue who Jimmie Johnson is. Oh, he's a NASCAR driver. That explains why. I'm not from Hamburgerland. Besides that, the title definitely does not overpromise the premise of the game. You'll be driving some of the most nonsensical vehicles you have ever seen. A bathtub? Check. A coffin? Check. A toilet? Check. As long as it's got an engine, you can drive it. Sadly, there are only a handful of vehicles available here. I was kind of looking forward to lots of wacky automobiles, since the premise really does leave a lot of room for creativity, but the car roster is fairly tame, all things considered. Each vehicle is also tied to a specific driver, and I have no idea if these are supposed to come from anywhere, but they seem incredibly random. Sorry Jimmie for not being too familiar with the extensive lore, but maybe one day you can tell me about the fat guy that's driving the toilet car. So in essence, this game is pretty much another kart racer as I expected, but with a twist. It has no random elements and is instead entirely skill-based. Well, at least it tries to be. Power-ups are not random pickups on the map, but active inventory items you can fire off as soon as you unlock them within the race. In order to do that, you need to impress the audience with various actions, such as power sliding, hitting specific parts on the map, and of course messing with your opponents. I'd argue this is probably the most interesting aspect the game brings to the table. And yes, from now on I will only refer to this game as the game, because there's no way I'm gonna say the full name of it every time, it's just too damn long. I actually really like that you get more items, as well as upgrades to your existing items through more aggressive and skillful driving. This could have been a cool idea for a Blur sequel, but well, we know how that turned out. Other than that, it's your standard kart racer affair, one that also controls pretty well. So why do I hate this game so much? Okay, hate is maybe too strong of a word, but for real, I've rarely had a racing game make me this angry.
Clearly worth the trouble.
Bro, what is going on? Oh my god, dude! And you might wonder why, especially since I just praised the game for being more skill-based and less random. To be honest, maybe I do just suck at the game. I didn't really have any skill issues on the other games, so I doubt it. But for some reason, every race was a giant pain in the ass. And that's with the lowest difficulty. I was getting slapped around left and right with items, and constantly had opponents breathing down my neck. For something that, on the surface, seems like it wants to be a family-friendly, fun racing game. Okay, maybe I take the family-friendly back. It was actually one of the most difficult racing games I've played for this video. There's no way I could see anyone without extensive racing game experience get anywhere in this game. And so I wanted to understand why. What makes this game so unnecessarily painful? Here's what I observed. For one, your items don't actually do anything. Half the time, my rockets weren't hitting their target, even if they were right in front of me. And when they did, they barely slowed them down, even after firing multiple of them at once. That's because they're really not supposed to, but instead damage its target. You see, there's this health bar in the top left of the screen, and this health bar determines how fast you're actually able to go. This has dramatic effects on your car, as the difference in speed between a near full health bar and a half depleted one is huge. Your car will also explode if your health bar runs out, and it's constantly running out from just driving, meaning your car could just explode from nothing on the spot. Nice, yeah. Explode from fucking nothing! The only way to restore your health is by driving through a pit stop, which might take you an entire lap to get to. And from what I could tell, opponents don't seem to get that same speed penalty. In this one-on-one duel, I hit my opponent with so many things at once, yet they were still able to catch up to me just fine. It's either the most annoying rubber band ever made, or they're just cheating. Well, I guess rubber banding is technically cheating. Anyways. Another thing that bothered me was the track designs. There was this one track with 3 drivers doing the same lap in reverse, which would lead to multiple head-on collisions I could hardly avoid. It's such a shit layout, man. Oh my god, dude. But then I realized that the entire meta in the game revolves around boosting. Your boost recharges after a few seconds, and the only way to stay ahead is by spamming the boost the moment it becomes available. I don't think I need to mention how lame this gets after a while. If the rest of the power-up items do absolutely nothing, and your boost is the only thing that matters, that's all the game is. It's just a boost spamming simulator where you need to get lucky not to lose your health immediately after exiting a pit stop. So yeah, this one didn't really do it for me at all. The idea that you can drive random objects is admittedly really cool, but even in that case, I don't think they did anything interesting with it. None of these vehicles offer anything unique to stand out, other than some different visual effects for the power-ups. And to be fair, this would normally be fine for any other kart racer, but it feels like a missed opportunity here. Gonna be giving this one 2 stars. Yeah, sorry Jimmie, I didn't like your game very much. And just like that, we've made it. We've made it to the very last game in this list. Once more, we'll be diving into one of Need for Speed's low-budget ports, this time taking a look at the Wii version of The Run. This one has become quite a bit more beloved as time went on, as the original The Run was quite disliked on release due to its extremely short campaign and awful performance on console. These days, people tend to look back on it more fondly, appreciating its genuinely breathtaking locations and cars. Just like with Hot Pursuit, the Wii version of The Run is an entirely different game yet again, though at least this time the general concept of a street race through the United States is still present. What's interesting here is that the story has been mostly rewritten, which in my humble opinion is definitely a good thing. Maybe this is a bit of a hot take since I've never seen or heard anyone else say this, but I think The Run's story kind of sucked. I never liked any of the characters, particularly the protagonist Jack, whose voice actor always sounded like he was about to fall asleep in the recording booth. None of the characters in the story were likable to me in any way, and in general the story was barely even put in the foreground past the initial hour of the game. Every now and then you just get a cutscene of Sam telling you to hurry the fuck up, or a random action set piece, or Jack almost cooming to some girls at a gas station. I mean, the main antagonist of the game doesn't even say a single line. The reason I'm bringing all of this up is to highlight how much better written and acted out the story in the Wii version is. Sure, you're missing all the animated cutscenes in favor of less interesting comic book stills. And truthfully, these can be pretty badly drawn at times, with inconsistent character faces and goofy looking cars. But on the flip side, there's some pretty decent audio design here that makes these scenes come alive. But what actually surprised me here is how the new characters introduced in this story are way more personable this time around. The main character is not some stone-faced, half-asleep jackass anymore. Ha, get it? But instead an, at times, pretty funny dude who you're actually rooting for. The main change in this version of the story is that your sidekick is now actually in the car with you as a co-pilot, which works way better than Sam just tuning in every few races to tell you to hurry the hell up. Needless to say, the red-haired girl, whose name actually remains a mystery for the majority of the story, is also way more likable. I think a lot of my positive outlook on this version of the story really has to do with the voice acting, which is surprisingly better than in the original version. But okay, that's enough about the story. What about the gameplay then? Well, it's rather fine. It's nothing revolutionary, but we've also had games with way worse gameplay in this video. It's very middle of the road here. The handling itself is fine, and most cars tend to drive largely the same, with drifts in particular feeling fairly awkward. Though you don't need to necessarily drift at all, since 99% of all races take place on very wide, very straight highway roads. There's fairly little interesting going on as far as track designs go, which can lead to the races feeling somewhat non-interactive. The game tries to balance this out with some straight up egregious rubber banding, and admittedly it kind of works. The rubber banding is mostly limited to cops or special rivals, so it's not that bad, And besides, most races in the story modes have loads of set pieces that actually decide the outcome of the race. Oh right, the set pieces. There's some unreasonably over-the-top ones in here that would make even the Fast and Furious look tame in comparison. Gameplay-wise, these are pretty lame though. All you really need to do is either steer or press the D-pad in certain directions. This would have been a great chance to utilize some of the Wii's motion controls, but they're inexplicably absent here. Ah, right. I almost forgot to bring this up, didn't I? Yes, the run on the Wii does not feature any kind of motion controls, making this the only racing game in this video without them. It's pretty strange to see one without them, and after playing 14 racing games with varying degrees of motion controls, I'll admit that I kinda missed these here. Set pieces only appear in the story, so if you're sick of them, you can switch to the challenge mode. In here, you can try out the game's various different cars, which admittedly is a pretty cool selection. You can also customize them properly this time. Glad to see they learned their lesson after Hot Pursuit. Other than that, the challenge mode is fairly simple. You earn medals based on your performance, which will unlock new events, cars and customization items over time. It's nothing super exciting, but a nice little addition to just get a little more out of the game. So all in all, what did I think of this game? The run on the Wii has to be one of the more strange adaptations as far as the Need for Speed series goes. It's clearly a low-budget title with various obvious corners being cut, but in some ways I actually like this one more than the original version. Genuinely, I really wish we would have gotten this version of the story in the main game, properly animated and all. While the gameplay itself is just really lacking, I can't outright call it bad either now that I have 14 other games as reference. I would only really recommend this one to folks who love the original The Run and want to see a different take on the same game. Expect some drawbacks, but also some genuine hidden goodness. Like the soundtrack, for example. It features remixes of classic Need for Speed music, composed by none other than Mick Gordon himself. You know Mick Gordon, the guy who made this. As for me, I've grown a little soft spot for this game, so I'll be giving this one 3.5 stars. Well, there we go. Those were 15 racing games that I picked out for the Nintendo Wii. Now obviously there are way more Wii racing games out there that I didn't decide to cover in this video for one reason or another. However, if the demand is there, I will check out some more Wii racing games on my Twitch channel, so make sure to follow me over there. But yeah, looking back, overall I think the Wii racing games library was very mixed in quality. I did make 2 other videos just like this one on Nintendo DS and PSP racing games, and I feel like in those we could obviously also observe very different qualities when it comes to the games. But it feels like there was something a bit more consistent throughout. I feel like with the Wii, everything felt a little bit more volatile. Like either the games were really great or really terrible. There was very rarely any in-between where I was just like, yeah, this game is just okay. But what did you think? Which of the games that I played and showed in this video did you like the most? Let me know in the comments below. And also, if you want me to make more videos like this one, make sure to give it a like and subscribe for more content in the future. And with that, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care, everyone.